Hey, it's Kevin back with another episode of the video blog. Well, yesterday we talked about television, and we're going to do it again today. But today's a different feel. Yesterday we talked about the ABC show Samantha Who. Recently, in the last 3 or 4 weeks or so, WGN America, or I think didn't they used to be Superstation WGN or whatever, the Chicago television station that was WGN, their national feed, because we don't get the same thing they get in Chicago. Started a new show at midnight Eastern. I get you at 11 o'clock Central Time. That's one of those things I knew I had to watch only because of my history. It's the Bob and Tom radio show on television. If you're not familiar with Bob and Tom, they're based out of WFBQ radio in Indianapolis. I worked against them for a couple years when I was programming WFMS back in the mid-90s. And they've been a phenomenon in Indianapolis and now throughout America for the last 20 years or so. In fact, I should be wearing a Bob and Tom hat today, which isn't kind of funny. I'm not, and I've actually got a couple. One of those things, I had heard of them before I moved to Indiana, had heard some of their comedy CDs. They do comedy albums 2-3 times a year. I've got a bunch of them. Wasn't really a huge fan until I worked against them for 2.5 years. And in my 2.5 years, we could never beat them in morning drive. In fact, the only day part that my radio station, WFMS, was not number one. Was in morning drive, and it was our biggest challenge and our biggest frustration never to have beaten them before I left. Once I left, I got more familiar with them. We actually brought them in as a satellite feed for the rock station I worked with in Akron, WONE, for a short time. I was able to hear them then after they left WONE on a variety of stations throughout Northeast Ohio, and have kind of kept track of Bob and Tom throughout the years. My wife has been a big fan for years since she grew up in the state of Indiana. And recently, WGN debuted. Basically, they take the Bob and Tom radio show, have put cameras in the studio, and then edit it down, I think, nightly on a one-day delay, I think it's one-day delay, for consumption on television. Of course, the people who are running Tribune Broadcasting are former radio people from J-Core Radio, from Clear Channel Radio, so it's an interesting concept. And it was one of those things I first started watching, and I didn't want to watch, well, I did want to watch, but I didn't want to watch, that I didn't find compelling. It's basically a bunch of people sitting around talking. But I find myself night after night going back and watching the Bob and Tom show. I don't know if I'm compelled because I'm a former radio guy. I don't know if I'm compelled because I think they're immensely talented human beings, none of which I've ever met in real life. You know, even though I worked against them, I actually know people who've dated them, who've worked with them, who've worked for them, but never actually met them and don't really have any desire to do that. I mean, it doesn't really matter to me. But I don't want to say watch it, but I just think it's fascinating to me. And I guess Don Imus kind of took the charge years ago when they started debuting his morning show on television, too. I don't know if it's going to be a trend. I don't necessarily know if it'll work, but it's something you might want to check out. By the way, if you're not familiar with Bob and Tom, the title of today's post, You Guys Rock, is back in the old days, back when they were Indiana only, the way that when you called them up on the telephone, they'd say, "Hi, Bob and Tom show," and you'd say, "Bob and Tom, you guys rock." The things I remember. One of those unrequited things I always wanted to do was beat Bob and Tom in the ratings. Okay, I did it in Akron. Kicked them pretty severely in Akron, but it wasn't quite the same thing as in their hometown of Indianapolis. I digress. I'm sure we'll talk about something other than television tomorrow. Although, with me, you never know. Have a good one. You guys rock.